And the next item and final item from me is an overview of the board's requested boundary adjustment scenarios. And Ms. Thayer will provide that presentation.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Cashwell. Today I will be presenting the board with a review for the standing requested boundary adjustment scenarios that respond to your August 28th request. This serves as our concluding report to the board related to your boundary adjustment requests. We will review and summarize input collected throughout the process, which has now ended, and examine final scenarios on which the board will take action on in December. As a reminder, school spaces fall within Journey to 2030's focus area of learning environment with the goal of all students and staff learning and working in safe, welcoming, and innovative spaces. Previously, a preliminary enrollment count was shared with the board. Here is the final enrollment count for the 25-26 school year, which is 35 fewer students than our preliminary count. Additionally, this slide illustrates the percentage of seats remaining available across HCPS. Now we will take a look at the scenarios the board will be considering for action in December. Staff have updated the slides to reflect the board's requested changes from the last 2 months. Starting with Carver, the functional capacity for Carver has increased by 4.3% from last school year to this current school year. The scenario remains unchanged from the September 11th presentation. The estimated impact of this scenario remains at 8 elementary students, placing Carver at approximately 94% functional capacity and Mayberry at 93%. At the request of the board, the Quioccasin Middle scenario has been through multiple changes since September 11th. The currently standing scenario is only impacting the same neighborhood as seen in the Carver scenario. This would have these students moving from Tuckahoe Middle to Quioccasin Middle. The estimated impact of this scenario would be at around 6 middle school students, placing Quioccasin at 78.9% and Tuckahoe at 95.5%. Moving on to high schools, the functional capacity for Freeman has decreased by 3% from last school year to this current year. This is before ACE Center students are accounted for on day 1 or day 2. This proposed scenario remains unchanged from the September 11th presentation. The scenario places Freeman at an estimated 94.4% functional capacity and Godwin at 94.3% functional capacity, again, prior to ACE Center students being accounted for. Looking at the Tucker scenario, this scenario was changed by the board during the October 23rd work session to remove the prior Section 3, which involved moving students from Tucker to Godwin. Only Sections 1 and 2 remain for this scenario. Tucker has experienced a decrease in functional capacity by 1.9% from last school year to this current year. The 2 sections under consideration would impact a total of 274 students, 168 in Section 1 and 106 in Section 2. This scenario would see Tucker at an estimated 88.6% functional capacity and Hermitage at an estimated 96.1% functional capacity prior to ACE Center impacts being accounted for.
Ms. Thayer, I hate to interrupt. If you don't mind pulling the mic down just a little bit.
I'm so sorry.
Mr. Pritchard had it up a little higher and it's just a little difficult to hear.
I apologize. Finally, we'll review the Henrico scenario. This scenario remains unchanged from the September 11th work session. Henrico has decreased in functional capacity by 2.6% from school year 2024. This scenario would impact a total of 242 total current students, 181 in Section 1, 60 in Section 2, and 1 in Section 3. This scenario places Henrico at an estimated 80.6% functional capacity once the new Cybersecurity Center and Fairways Development estimated student yields are accounted for. Highland Springs would be at an estimated 83.1%, and Hermitage would be at an estimated 73%. This slide provides an overview of the high schools when all 3 scenarios are implemented simultaneously with the updated school year 2025-26 data. This chart displays the net changes for each of the 6 high schools that could be impacted should these scenarios move forward. Only one of these schools is impacted by more than one scenario, that being Hermitage. So it is important to note that those figures will not match prior slides for Hermitage's estimated enrollments or functional capacity percentages. As a review of the overall estimated functional capacities for these schools before ACE Center students are accounted for, Freeman is estimated at 94.4%, Godwin is estimated at 94.3%, Henrico is estimated at 80.6%, Hermitage is estimated at 86.9%, Highland Springs is estimated at 83.1%, and Tucker is estimated at 88.6%. And for the board's convenience, here's a chart displaying Day 1 and Day 2 estimated functional capacities for all 6 potentially impacted high schools using the school year 2025-26 enrollment data. Starting on the public input received, this will be a high-level overview of the major themes as they apply to the currently standing scenarios accumulated by the solicitation of public feedback. Additional documentation related to public input that has been uploaded into board docs. HCPS had multiple options available for community members to submit input on the boundary adjustment scenarios. These included an online survey that was available in multiple languages, was available from September 16th to October 10th. This survey accumulated 1,729 responses. 3 public town halls were held, where a total of 346 response cards were submitted, and multiple small group discussions were held and facilitated by division leadership. Discussions had note takers that summarized the topics and points made by community members in attendance. Written comments submitted directly to the school board on the September 25th and October 9th meetings saw a total of 28 total comments related to redistricting. The redistricting email inbox has been available from September 11th, which was the first day that boundary adjustment scenarios were brought forward to the school board, and continues to be active for community members. As of this Tuesday, November 11th, there have been 306 emails received by this inbox. A public hearing was held by the school board on October 23rd, where community members had the opportunity to address the board directly with their comments, during which no speakers came forward. That is a total of 2,409 written responses from the community and 12 facilitated small group discussions over the course of 3 town halls. Breaking the public input collected down by scenario, starting with Carver, here's an overview of the responses received from the various forms of public comment. The Carver scenario had 130 community members submit feedback using the survey, with the majority of respondents being opposed to the changes. This breakdown can be seen in the chart provided on the upper right of the slide. Predominantly, community members chose options citing feeder patterns and community cohesion as concerns. 6 respondents submitted other as a concern, which allowed for surveyees to free write in the comments, and items such as mental health concerns of students impacted were discussed in these responses. During the town halls, a dot-based feedback activity took place that allowed for participants to indicate their level of support for a scenario by placing a dot that showed whether they supported, opposed, or were neutral on a scenario. The results of the dot activity from the town halls for the Carver scenario is the bottom chart on the slide. It shows a predominance of opposition or neutrality, and primary discussion points during the town halls and from the response cards submitted centered around feeder pattern changes, school capacity, and transportation burdens. There were 2 emails submitted to the redistricting inbox for this scenario specifically, both being in opposition to the proposed boundary adjustments, citing similar reasons to those listed above. Okay. Looking at the Quioccasin scenario, here's an overview of the responses received from the various forms of public comment. The Quioccasin scenario had 954 respondents, with the majority being opposed to the changes, as seen in the top chart on the slide. As a reminder to the board, the Quioccasin scenario has changed twice, with the first adjustment occurring only 1 day prior to this survey closing. The primary concerns listed for the Quioccasin scenario were school capacity or program changes, as well as feeder pattern changes. There were 67 respondents that submitted other as a concern and included comments on impacts to social and academic growth for students, distance between impacted neighborhoods and schools, mental health of students impacted, lack of diversity, and real estate values. The breakdown of the dot activity shows a predominance of opposition, with a total of 243 dots out of 258, being opposed to the scenario. Primary discussion points from the town halls include centered on capacity concerns, community cohesion and ties, transportation concerns, timeline issues, and programmatic changes. There were 26 written comments submitted to the board and 175 emails submitted to the redistricting email inbox for the Quioccasin scenario. 197 of those written comments were in opposition to the proposed boundary adjustments. For the Freeman scenario, there were 218 community members who submitted feedback on the survey. With the majority of respondents being opposed to the changes, they cited feeder pattern concerns, community cohesion, and capacity concerns. 22 respondents submitted other as a concern and discussed items such as disruptions to social and emotional experiences and distance between options in impacted neighborhoods. Looking at the chart for the dot activity, it is showing an inverse with a majority of support on the Freeman scenario. Primary discussion points from the town halls included transition plan logistics, capacity relief measures, and process fatigue for specific neighborhoods. There were 14 emails submitted to the redistricting inbox, 10 being in opposition to the proposed boundary adjustments, 2 being fairly neutral, and 2 supporting the proposal. Moving on to Tucker, there were 103 respondents from the survey, with the majority being supportive of the changes. The primary concerns listed for the Tucker scenario were school capacity or program changes and the separation of community. There were 5 respondents that submitted other as a concern and included comments on diversity and the need for a majority feeder school for Tucker. The breakdown of the dot activity shows a predominance of opposition or neutrality on the Tucker scenario. Discussion topics at the town halls included demographic changes, transition concerns, and a need for support services for students that are proposed to change schools. There were 7 emails submitted to the redistricting inbox, 3 being in opposition, and 4 being fairly neutral, focusing on logistical questions on transitions for students. Lastly, looking at the Henrico scenario, the survey saw 110 respondents, with 71% opposed to the proposed adjustments. Primary concerns chosen for this scenario were separation of community and school capacity. There were 14 other respondents that included comments regarding student disruption, safety concerns, lack of diversity, mental health of students impacted, and real estate values. The breakdown of the dot activity shows a majority of neutrality on the Henrico scenario, with only 23 dots for opposition and 15 dots for support. Discussion points included socioeconomic equity, community cohesion, building upgrades, and transition concerns. There were 9 emails submitted to the redistricting email inbox, 7 being in opposition, and 2 being neutral towards the boundary adjustments. As an overview for transitions, the board determined that students in grades 5, 8, 10, 11, and 12 may remain in their previously zoned schools at each student's discretion. This allows for students that started at a high school to finish at their high school, should they choose to do so. For further clarity, those are school year 2025 students currently in grades 9, 10, and 11 that may stay or go, also known as rising 10, 11, or 12th graders for school year 2026. For elementary and middle, only those in transition grades, currently 4th and 7th graders, also known as rising 5th and 8th, would be offered the option to remain. The board has determined that no additional transportation options will be provided to students that choose to stay at their previously zoned schools. Students opting to stay will need to provide their own transportation. Given the board's original timeline, this meeting provided an overview of public input collected, as well as the remaining scenarios in student transition plan. Now that you've seen the latest scenarios and totality of the feedback, we'd be happy to answer any questions or take any direction related to whether the scenarios will continue for December for action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Thayer. I appreciate your report out and also your tireless work through this whole process of changes has been made and recalculating things and making new maps and that sort of thing. So thank you, truly. Colleagues, Ms. Kinsella?
In general, for example, when we're moving students as to capacity of a school, for example, Freeman, for example, Tucker, you feel confident, or at least in the development numbers and enrollment projections and so forth, before, that it's not just a bubble, right? Before we move students, we like to look at everything possible, as we've discussed, right? Programmatic changes, all kinds of things. The trends we're seeing at Freeman and Tucker, in your opinion, these are not bubbles?
I would note the trend data that Rachel has shared with us over the previous years related to overall projected enrollment for the school division have been on par, which shows a continued declining of students. What has held true for the past, I believe, 3 years is a reduction of students across our high schools. So that is a trend we're confident is on track to remain, which is a continued reduction in high schoolers across the district. That overall reduction is similar to what we projected and varies again by level, but what hasn't varied is the high school level.
And I guess layering on that, the board has shown great interest in learning more about development and potential development impact. And I know you've looked at this, you follow this in the work that you do. That's kind of where I'm leading. I mean, I get the trends for the division and different levels of schools within the division, but development has been of great interest to the board.
Of course, and when looking at development patterns, we are, of course, seeing more development happening specifically in the Fairfield district, as well as Verina has had a few hotspots. On the edges of Brookland from Fairfield is also seeing some development, and that, of course, is important to call out when we're looking at trends.
Right.
So when discussing Tucker and Freeman, we are seeing some development happening in those areas. So I do think it's important to get ahead of those developments, especially these long-range ones that are looking at having over 1,000 units
Right.
being put in.
Thank you. I'll just say once again, as I've said, probably, I don't know, quite a few meetings whenever this topic comes up, I don't believe I've heard enough from my constituents in the Hermitage community. I don't believe that the presentation of all the data collected shows that constituents impacted at Hermitage know. So I have concern about that, and I agree with the constituent feedback regarding Tucker, that leaving Tucker, while we're going to fix capacity, we'll still have 5 feeder middle schools. So sense of community there. Again, that's of concern to me. But with the number of students that we're moving into Hermitage, again, I just need to hear Dr. Cashwell confirm and guarantee resources for Dr. Jackson and his school with the inflow and potential outflow of students to Hermitage High School.
Yeah, I would note that should the board approve these scenarios in December, it's going to be incumbent upon staff to begin first as course registration begins in January and February to track what student enrollment is and determine which students may stay or go. So, as you noted with the redistricting plan, we know how many students could be impacted, but it will be largely dependent on those taking advantage of staying or choosing to go. So we're going to have, I would say, a transition year where we're going to have to pay really close attention to staffing and work with our families to make decisions and indicate their interest in staying or going early on so that we can plan and we can staff each building according to their needs. And that may look different over a period of a few years as that transition fully takes place. But our goal is always to make sure we're putting the right staffing and supports in each school to match the student needs and enrollment.
Thank you, Dr. Cashwell. Madam Chair, that's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. Irving.
Yeah, thank you for this. I think the update is helpful, especially looking at all the, the survey and the participants at the town halls. I just constantly come back to thinking about how we are losing students as a whole. And, when you look at these day 1, day 2 numbers before any switch, outside of Tucker, it just makes me wonder, if any of this is even necessary. No, I don't, that's not to say that I won't end up voting for this in December, but I'm just looking at these and saying, is this actually numbers that warrant moving people at all outside of Tucker? And I don't know, because I just think that looking at like the Weldon Cooper data, they were spot on with the reduction of students. We were wrong. We thought we were going to grow slightly. And I think regardless of all of this development that's happening, the median age of a home buyer in the United States right now is 61 years old. These people do not have children who are going into schools. And I would love for our student population to be increasing. I want as many families as possible to move to Henrico and be able to live here and experience the wonderful things that we have to offer, but that is not what's happening. And I think it would be irresponsible to not consider those factors. And I think maybe we have ideas of how things were at a time, but maybe that data is not accurate now. And so I'm left looking at these day one, day two capacities, noting that I think most of the high schoolers, for example, are probably going to stay where they're at. So most of these switches are, they're not happening all at once. It would be phased in over time as the new 8th graders and then eventually 7th and 6th graders move on up. But I just wonder, are we actually fixing something? And maybe we are. I had to make a final determination in December on that, but just looking at the numbers and getting the actual membership counts, I think it's made me think in a different way than I had previously. And, I certainly want to think, with the changes that would be happening to Godwin with the development there, just keeping an eye on that because we are increasing Godwin's capacity, not to a high level by any means, but more than they previously had. And I just want to, us to be cognizant of these things and never, think that we're solving something long-term whenever this is just a year in and year out thing that we have to constantly be mindful of, and I think we are. But I just, I'm not as sure as I was previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Young.
Hey, thank you, Ms. Rachel, for all the work you did on the redistricting. I know countless hours and days and probably lost a little sleep in the process, but I want to thank you for putting everything together for us. I'm going to speak to the Henrico High School scenario. Not going to sort of relive anything, but for Henrico to be so low and to be in the middle of the county, it's hard to make sense out of it, with it being directly in the middle of the county. I can understand Verona being on the edge of the county and where the enrollment is there, but for Henrico to have shrunk over the years so much and nothing has been put in place to help that community or bring cohesiveness to the community. And I think that what this scenario is doing, just want to note that in this scenario, whether it's the Central Gardens area, all of these students went to school together at Ratcliffe. If it's the Chamberlain Farm scenario, all of these students go to school together currently at Chamberlain. So it is a reunification of students as well. So these students have gone to elementary school and middle school together. And to have that community be rebuilt at Henrico, because Henrico needs that right now, to walk through those hallways and not see many students there, or not see that culture build, or understanding that we won't have a JV girls basketball team, and watching the band sort of dwindle right in front of my eyes. And I'm watching other schools as I travel around, and these other schools get to enjoy those things. They get to enjoy the culture. They get to enjoy the sold-out football games, and the band is almost 2 or 3 times the size of Henrico High School. So I just want to encourage my board members to, think about that as we look through these scenarios. I do think that we have something that will work here in place, if passed in December. But I just want to give that little bit of context to my counterparts on what happens to a school when it's so low in enrollment. I know we have the issues when it's exceeding capacity, but I do want my colleagues to think about what community looks like when it starts to dwindle at some of our schools. So thank you for that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Atkins.
Ms. Thayer, sincere gratitude to you. Also, I want to thank everyone who took the time to participate in our survey, attended the town halls, and engaged in one-on-one conversations with me and any school board member. I appreciate you, and I acknowledge the many priorities you and I are facing in this country and closer to home in this county and even in our neighborhoods. And I don't want, as a leader, to add to worry. I know that when individuals purchase a home, the school that our children attend is an important factor, and I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge, at least at the genesis, or making sure that I remember the why for any shift or boundary adjustment. Paying attention to the survey results. The survey results are low, and so is town hall participation, in my opinion, compared to the number of families that we serve. And so I also take that into consideration. However, I will address it because individuals took the time to participate in it, and it's important. So specifically, the survey shows that the majority of respondents expressed opposition to the Henrico scenario, while most town hall participants were neutral. I do take this feedback seriously. I'm grateful for the thoughtful engagement from our communities, and more importantly, hearing directly from you helps guide the decision-making process. So everyone who's paying attention now or will look at the recording or pull me to the side, please continue sharing your thoughts. The vote is in December. Please continue sharing your thoughts. I'll say I statements because it helps me in my decision-making as I'm a conduit. I'm an extension cord of connecting individuals to what they want for their children and for their education. So the focus is education. Ms. Thayer, I do have a question about the numbers on the overview of public input slide. I think that's slide 7. If you can help me understand the math, because, yeah, there we go. I do have a question. So according to this, you have 334 written and email responses. So 306 emails, 28 written, adds to 334. And I'm going to piece this together. Correct?
Yes.
Okay, let's move forward. When you add up the emails and written responses on each slide, my calculations is 233.
Yes.
Why is that?
Some of the written responses were for scenarios that are no longer on the table. We had many related to Jackson Davis's scenario, which of course is no longer there. We had several about Hungry Creek. So those were removed from the specific scenario slides as they were just not related to that specific scenario. But they were included in the reports for the town hall summaries as well as the survey report, just so that the board and the public are able to read what those responses were as well.
Outstanding. I actually think it's important to acknowledge all of the individuals that participated, and it should be in this presentation. And then an explanation to what the difference is. So if there is someone coming to take a look at this presentation, they're going to do exactly what I did, and they're going to add up the math and say, hey, Henrico County isn't adding this accurately. So I would encourage an edit to explain why the numbers are different.
We will certainly add that in. Thank you.
You're welcome. Another question that I have, when I look at the Henrico scenario, and I'll scroll to that quickly here, for the town hall feedback, where we have 68 individuals that are neutral, can you or someone from the leadership team give insight as to the feedback they were hearing in the rooms as to why folks are selecting neutral? I don't want to assume, but I will give you what my thoughts perhaps are, and it's because the majority of individuals may not have been from the Fairfield or Varina district, and therefore they're saying I'm neutral because I'm not familiar with those areas. But that's an assumption. Can someone give me some facts around what neutral means in this slide?
So certainly, we wouldn't be able to accurately represent every conversation that took place in every room, so I don't want to overgeneralize, but I do know that our facilitators, when they were directing participants to take this activity, were just looking for a pulse check as the scenarios were being described related to an individual's reaction, with neutral not necessarily being negative or positive, right? Being truly unsure. It could mean I need more information to form a position. It could be I have questions, or it could be this, it doesn't impact me, or it's not my community, and so therefore, I'm not going to take a position one way or the other. So that's certainly one piece of information. The cards collected that had specific commentary, I think, are a really good way to parse out each individual's feedback without us being a layer to, misunderstand the comments. They were very specific to what each individual left, and we did provide those particular comments to the board members and made those available. So there's a full report for each town hall that has the comments gleaned, then an overview of the themes gleaned, as well as the red, yellow, green.
I think it would be helpful, because neutral also means I don't know. I don't know what boundary adjustment even means. I don't know if this is the same as redistricting. I think, one thing, this has been a wonderful process of learning and offering the opportunity for engagement. When presenting surveys, clarity is really important. So, options like, especially face-to-face and in person, I don't know, check here. That is a very different message, and it also is helpful because it gives guidance that from a leadership perspective, perhaps we can do some things differently. I know that we have the list of individual to parse out and figure out. It would be helpful if we did not have to.
There's a
Is there an-
summary. There's a summary for each school scenario that summarizes the feedback on the cards as well as the specifics. So, and we did include that in board docs. I know it's lengthy, but that does give an attempt. Certainly, I hear you around the language used and understand that it could be interpreted a number of ways, and would caution just using that red, yellow, green in isolation, which is why we wanted to give lots of opportunities for people to respond in different ways, to the extent that it would be helpful in building that larger body of input that the board is considering. And it's a lot that we have provided here. And certainly, the survey data, there was a pretty strong response when you think about the total number of survey respondents based on the number of individuals potentially impacted here. So certainly, I think that gives a pretty good, it gives a good look at how individuals were feeling related to each scenario in a different way, right, with different terminology. So I think there are a number of data sets here, at least to compare and use.
So again, I think it's helpful in this particular presentation to share that. An individual who goes back and review this presentation may not be aware of all of the layers that school board members may be aware of.
Oh, certainly, and we did include in the board docs with this presentation the full summaries for every town hall, all of the survey data, but we could surely add some summary slides as well. It's just, we didn't want to neglect the full picture, and that's why we did include the full reports in board docs as well. So as any individual might visit this presentation, they could also see each of the town hall data sets as well as the full summary for the survey.
Understood. I'll say this a different way. For individuals that are not astute and have not been following this, I strongly suggest that you put this information in the presentation itself,
Into the slide
into
deck.
the slide deck. So I know board docs, there's other information there, perhaps there's information here, there, and everywhere, but this is the presentation that we are using and that's presented to leadership for us to consider as part of our decision-making. So for the general audience and population that may not have been following this, I think it is important to add that in here. That's really the point that I'm trying to make.
Certainly, we're happy to make any additions. We want to make it easy to find and follow, but we also don't want to truncate data as well, understanding that, anything we could put onto a slide is just sharing parts or pieces of a summary. Otherwise, as you can see, each of the documents here in Board Docs is hundreds of pages, so just trying to make it something that's digestible. But happy to add slides, add additional information. We also have the website that has all the full reports, so we definitely want to make it easy to find and easy to follow along with.
Thank you. Chair Shay.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, I appreciate Ms. Thayer mentioning that, throughout the survey, even up to the day before the survey closed, some of these options continue to change. And so some of the comments in the survey were taken into account kind of as things went on, and so they've changed or been resolved, if you will. Like, for example, with the Freeman scenario, there was a lot of feedback about what transition grades, right? And so that was resolved along the way. Also, reading through the individual comments in the scenarios, I noticed a lot of conflation where people were opining on a certain scenario, but then their comments went to a different scenario. So anyway, the point is, these are, to Ms. Atkins' point, these are layers as a school board that we are looking not just straight at what the respondents' numbers are. Obviously, that's a layer, but also, digging deeper into how have changes impacted this, right? Perhaps people thought they were responding to one scenario and they were another, and so taking all of this into account. And then, for me as a school board member, I'll readily admit I am not an expert in Hermitage, Henrico, and Highland Springs High School. And so, I lean on the community input from that to better understand it, as well as my colleagues who serve those areas, right? These are layers that we look at. I will say I share Ms. Kinsella's concern for the feeder patterns at Tucker. This is something that we've heard for before we were on the board, and its impact to the community. So I'm glad to see that they're getting capacity relief. I think that's greatly needed, but I think some other challenges there endure. To Mr. Irving's point about looking at the enrollment numbers, I think this is where, as board members, it's so important for us to know beyond just what the numbers on the page, like what they mean day to day in our schools, what they mean for building usage and impact and available resources and all of those things where, and we talked about that some kind of throughout the fall as to while a number might be under 100%, it still may be a significant strain on the school. And so understanding with our planning department and our superintendent and our and her staff what those numbers mean, and then also for us being in the buildings and seeing the day-to-day operations, having the conversations with the building staff about what the needs are, and knowing the community. I know for Freeman, for the better part of 10 years, they've been over capacity. There's a lot of places in the building where 3 teachers are assigned to 2 classrooms, and in an older building where there's no flex space and there's no office space for teachers when they can't be in their classroom, that's a significant challenge, right? That's a significant challenge, as well as many more faced with the high capacity there. And so I know specifically, speaking to my area, the Godwin Freeman, it's very much threading a needle, right? To Ms. Kinsella's point, making sure it's not a bubble, making sure we don't swing a pendulum too far one direction, looking at development and those sorts of things. So anyway, I still think, I wholeheartedly believe Freeman needs capacity relief, and that while it is hard it is hard to change high schools. It is hard to change any schools. You know, these are tough conversations. I think with the expanding the ability for high schoolers who have started to stay to finish, I think that that is a win for students and families to try to relieve some of the acute challenges around boundary adjustments. So continue to have a lot to think about and process over the next month, but just to be clear, these are the scenarios we will be voting on December 18th. It is, so this is it. These are them. December 18th, it is a little over 30 days away. So any other comments, redirects, questions? Thank you so much.
I do have a
Oh,
question.
just kidding.
I
Ms.
do have a
Kinsella,
question.
here we go.
I don't know if it's for Ms. Thayer necessarily, or if it's for Dr. Cashwell, or perhaps Ms. Cox in communication. Now that the scenarios are final, it doesn't appear the board has made any adjustments today. Communication. What does communication look like before the board votes in
So
December?
we've continued after each board meeting to share out to the entire community progress in the process, and we'll do that again. We can certainly, while there haven't been any changes made, we'll reaffirm that as the status of the scenarios as of the last reporting remains, and that the board is still on track to take action in December.
Thank you. Madam Chair, that's all I had.
All right, thank you so much.